The Southern Defense Forces of Ukraine stated that Russia is actively waging an information war, exaggerating its successes and creating panic among the population. Thus, fierce fighting continues in the Hulyapol direction, but the defense is holding. Communication and logistics are established with hundreds of Russian occupiers and dozens of pieces of equipment being destroyed daily. The defense forces denied rumors about blocking detachments and urged people to trust only official information. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, there have been 112 combat clashes on the front since the beginning of the day. For more details on the situation on the battlefield, stay tuned.
Special Operations Forces of the Ukrainian Armed Forces eliminated an enemy sabotage group in Pokrovsk, Donetsk region and destroyed a strike drone. According to Ukrainian defenders, 4 Russian occupiers tried to take positions in a multi-story building but were detected and neutralized. Before that, one of them tried to shoot down a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone but was unsuccessful. Over the past week, a sweep of Russian invaders was carried out in Pokrovsk itself, covering an area of about 11.5 square kilometers. This was reported by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky. According to him, based on the results of trips to the Donetsk region, the issue of defending Pokrovsk, Mirnohrad and the surrounding areas is being considered comprehensively. The enemy, having suffered significant losses and encountering effective Ukrainian resistance, was forced to deploy its operational reserve in the area of Pokrovsk and the Mirnohrad agglomeration. Also, according to Syrsky, work continues on maintaining existing and establishing additional logistical routes.
We are blocking attempts to storm the cities with small infantry groups. For this purpose, as well as to regain lost positions, certain of our units are conducting active operations. The aggressor is constantly trying to change the direction of attacks here, using devious infiltration tactics, including disguising themselves as civilians or using them as cover. We must do everything possible to supply our group and ensure the timely medical evacuation of the wounded. We must not only hold our positions, but also preserve the lives and health of our defenders, both men and women. Oleksandr Syrsky, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on Facebook.
In Pokrovsk itself, Ukrainian defenders continue to hold back the enemy from advancing further. Fighting is taking place along the entire railway line. Ukrainian troops, in particular the 425th Separate Assault Regiment Skelia, in coordination with other units in the area of responsibility of the 7th Air Assault Corps, are conducting raids south of the railway to set up ambushes and destroy the enemy. Combat clashes continue in the central part of Pokrovsk. Over the past day, assault units have eliminated 21 Russian soldiers. FPV drone operators are working in the city targeting enemy personnel and equipment concealed among the buildings. The Russians are trying at the cost of their own lives to prepare the ground for further advances and to establish satellite communications. The Ukrainian Defense Forces are monitoring this and preventing such actions.
Pokrovsk agglomeration. For a year and a half, the occupiers have been unsuccessfully storming the positions of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. Yes, there have been certain tactical successes, but at this point it is not possible to speak of the capture of either Pokrovsk or the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Meanwhile, the losses suffered by the occupiers over a year and a half are comparable to the size of the Leningrad military district of the occupying country's army. In other words, these are catastrophic losses, even for the Russian Federation.
And in the Lyman direction, the Russian army attacked near the settlements of Rakivka, Karpivka, Novoselivka, and Shandriholov. In the Kostiantynivka direction, the enemy attempted to storm the area around Kostiantynivka itself, as well as Stepanivka, Pleshchevka, and Rusin Yar. And in the hottest Pokrovsk direction, the Russian army tried to push back Ukrainian defenders in the areas of the settlements of Shakov, Rodinsky, Mirnohrad, Novekonomichne, Kotline, and Udakne.
Today it is clear that the enemy is acting very actively in the Hulyapol area. The enemy is conducting very active combat operations in the Kostiantynivka direction, as well as in the Oleksandrivske, Southern Slobozhanske, Siversk and Lyman directions. In other words, practically all the hotspots along the line of contact are active across all fronts. It is clear that today the Russians are trying to accomplish the task that, according to their calculations and deadlines, they were supposed to complete either sometime in mid-August or at the latest in September.
Ukrainian defense forces have managed to cut the Russians off from supplies in Kupiansk. In addition, enemy units that entered the city have found themselves trapped in its northern districts. This was reported by Viktor Trehubov, the spokesperson for the Joint Forces Group. The number of Russians in the city is gradually decreasing, and reinforcements are not arriving, as they are being destroyed even before reaching the city. According to Trehubov, the enemy is trying to act actively not within the city itself but around it, where they are attempting to bypass Ukrainian defense forces.
The Russians' announcements of victory turned out to be premature. They carried out active offensive operations at the beginning of November. During these offensive actions, they began fighting in the city center and tried to break through to the south. And it seemed that the city was almost taken. They started reporting this first through Gerasimov, then through Putin. But the situation in the city changed not in their favor. At the moment, the situation for them is a stalemate. And this is ironic because Putin has already made a statement about the encirclement of Ukrainian battalions. But they cannot confirm this in any way. Viktor Tregubov, spokesperson for the Joint Forces Grouping, speaking on the United News Marathon broadcast.
Despite the Kremlin's loud statements about Russia's supposedly inevitable victory, the actual offensive is progressing very slowly, according to analysts from the Institute for the Study of War. If the Russian army continues to advance at its current pace, the complete capture of Donetsk region may not happen before August 2027. In Pokrovsk, the Russians are advancing only about 120 meters per day and control around 66% of the city after 118 days of fighting. The Institute for the Study of War notes that the Kremlin is trying to create the impression that its successes are inevitable in order to put pressure on Ukraine and the West. Meanwhile, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russian army losses since the start of the full-scale invasion have exceeded 1,169,000 soldiers. Just in the past 24 hours, the defense forces have eliminated 1,140 Russian occupiers. They also destroyed a tank, 3 armored vehicles, 21 artillery systems, a multiple launch rocket system, air defense equipment, 2 Russian aircraft, as well as 110 units of enemy automotive and special equipment.
If, during peace negotiations, Russia is allowed to alter Ukraine's borders even minimally, sooner or later it will do the same with Lithuania's territory. This was stated by Lithuania's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kęstutis Bundris. It is extremely important to use the available leverage in negotiations for a just peace in Ukraine. For Europe, these are the frozen Russian assets, Ukraine's EU membership, and the establishment of a special tribunal.
If we allow the borders to be redrawn in any way, even in the smallest form, they will come to us with a marker and a map, and then with tanks to change them somewhere else. We cannot allow any de jure or de facto legitimization of the occupied territories. Kęstutis Bundris, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, in an interview with Delphi.
Lithuania has also officially decided to join the Special Tribunal on Russia's crimes of aggression. This was reported by the country's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Lithuania will become the first country after Ukraine to join the Special Tribunal. It is worth noting that such a tribunal will allow investigations against the highest leadership of Russia, who are currently protected by personal immunity. However, verdicts can only be handed down after they lose their positions. Only Ukraine has the right to determine the terms of a just peace with Russia. This was stated by Canadian Foreign Minister Anita Anand. She noted that Canada has always supported Ukraine on the issue of its territorial integrity. Also, according to the diplomat, next week the issue of peace in Ukraine will be actively discussed during the meeting of NATO foreign ministers in Brussels.
Canada supports Ukraine and its territorial integrity, but the final decision regarding Ukraine rests solely with Ukraine, including matters of territorial integrity. We strive to support Ukraine and the decisions it makes in the areas of rule of law, peace, and security. Anita Anand, Canadian Foreign Minister, during a conversation with journalists.
As long as Russia rejects all peace efforts, sanctions against the aggressor country must be strengthened, and defense and financial support for Kyiv must continue. We wrote about this on the website of the Office of the President of Ukraine following a phone conversation between Volodymyr Zelensky and the head of the European Commission. The key priority for the EU is a peace agreement that will ensure real security for Ukraine and Europe, as Ursula von der Leyen emphasized during her speech in the European Parliament. Victoria Chisyukina will tell you more about this.
Russia is showing no willingness to end the war against Ukraine. Therefore, pressure on the aggressor must continue, stated the President of the European Commission. And the main principle in working on a peace agreement should be nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine and nothing about Europe without Europe, Ursula von der Leyen emphasized.
The key priority is that any agreement must ensure a just and lasting peace. and it must guarantee real security for both Ukraine and Europe. As a sovereign state, Ukraine cannot have any restrictions on its armed forces that would make the country vulnerable to future attacks. And this applies both to deterrence and to the security of Europe. After all, Ukraine's security is Europe's security. That is why Kyiv needs reliable, long-term, and trustworthy security guarantees. The European Union demands that Moscow return all Ukrainian children abducted by Russia, insists on the inviolability of Ukraine's sovereignty, and will continue to support Kyiv. Ukraine's future lies in the European Union, and this is a fundamental and essential part of any security guarantee system, stated the President of the European Commission. Any decisions concerning Ukraine and Europe can only be made with their consent. Other options are unacceptable, emphasized German Chancellor Friedrich Merz.
Putin must realize that he has no chance of winning this war at the cost of European freedom and peace. This is the guiding principle of our policy, particularly regarding Ukraine. We want this war to end as soon as possible. But an agreement reached without the consent of Ukraine and without the consent of Europeans will not become the foundation for a genuine and lasting peace in Ukraine. That is why the unity of Europe, unity with Ukraine, and unity of the transatlantic alliance are now of crucial importance.
To increase the chances for peace, it is necessary to intensify pressure on Russia, believes the head of EU diplomacy. Kaja Kallas called on allies to speed up work on sanctions against Russia and on mechanisms for financing Ukraine, including through a reparations loan using frozen Russian assets. The European Union will make a significant contribution to providing security guarantees to Ukraine, the diplomat assured.
Security guarantees for Ukraine do not change the fact that the real threat comes from Russia. Over the past 100 years, Russia has attacked more than 19 countries, some of them 3 or 4 times. None of these countries has ever attacked Russia. Therefore, in any peace agreement, we must focus on how to secure concessions from the Russian side so that it stops its aggression and does not attempt to change borders by force. There are rarely wars in the world where the situation is as clear as it is here. We have one aggressor and one victim. The focus should be on what Russia, the aggressor, must do, not on what Ukraine, the victim, should sacrifice.
Europe will be involved in providing security guarantees to Ukraine, which are being considered as part of the US peace plan to end the war, President Donald Trump said.
Over the past week, my team has made significant progress on the issue of ending Russia's war against Ukraine. The original 28-point peace plan developed by the United States has been revised to incorporate additional proposals from both sides. There are only a few points left on which there is no agreement. I hope to meet with Zelensky and Putin in the near future, but only when the agreement to end the war is final or in its final stage. Donald Trump, President of the United States, on the social network Truth Social.
But for now, analysts believe that Putin is only pretending to be ready for negotiations.
For Russia, any peace plan is extremely disadvantageous. That is, they can play at imitation. They thought that Ukraine would not be ready, for a full-fledged negotiation process, although Ukraine has repeatedly emphasized its readiness for such a process, and, accordingly, the war, because Putin has repeatedly stated this in recent days, the war will continue. Why? Because he believes he has enough resources for mass killings in Ukraine.
The heads of the foreign affairs committees of 20 European parliaments issued a joint statement and supported Ukraine's position on achieving peace. At the same time, they warned against a peace agreement that could play into the Kremlin's hands. This was reported on November 24th by the head of the Estonian Foreign Affairs Committee, Rigi Kugu Mark Mickelson. The parliamentarians emphasized that concessions to the aggressor will only make a new war more. Victoria Chistyukina for Freedom TV channel. Turkey is ready to include its military personnel as part of the international forces that will be sent to Ukraine as part of security guarantees. This was stated by the Turkish Ministry of Defense. However, a ceasefire must first be achieved. The ministry also noted that Istanbul will support any initiative that brings security and stability. Germany is preparing a plan in case of war with Russia. According to the Wall Street Journal, German officers began developing it 3 years ago, and now they are rushing to implement it. The plan, in particular, provides for the deployment of 800,000 German, American, and other NATO troops eastward to the front line. The document also specifies the ports, rivers, railways, and roads along which they will advance, as well as how they will be supplied and protected along the way. The publication writes that the plan is the clearest manifestation to date of what its authors call a whole-of-society approach to war. France is resuming voluntary military conscription. This was announced by the country's president, Emmanuel Macron. Mandatory military service there was abolished almost 30 years ago. The new program will launch as early as next summer. People aged 18 and 19 will be able to participate, and they will serve only within France for a period of 10 months. The initiative is aimed at strengthening youth training and renewing the country's armed forces, Macron added. Earlier, a social survey was conducted in the country, and the overwhelming majority of respondents, almost three-quarters, supported the introduction of voluntary military service. The service has three specific goals: strengthening the pact that binds our nation and the army, enhancing defense capabilities, and consolidating the education of our youth. We will gradually increase the number of participants. In the summer of 2026, 3,000 people will be selected for national service, and by 2030, this number will gradually increase to 10,000. My goal for France is 50,000 by 2035. In a world where uncertainty reigns and force prevails over law, war is a modern reality. Our country cannot afford fear, panic, unpreparedness, or division. And fear never prevents danger. The only way to avoid it is to be prepared for it. In November of this year, Russian oil exports decreased by 15 to 20% compared to October. This is a direct effect of American sanctions against Lukoil and Rosneft, as well as restrictions from other countries. This was stated by Vladislav Vasyuk, the president of Ukraine's Commissioner for Sanctions Policy, at a briefing before the start of the Sanctions Summit taking place in Kyiv. Over the course of 2 days, representatives from several dozen countries and public organizations will discuss which sanctions could further limit the aggressor's military potential. And now Larisa Petruk will tell you more about this in detail.
At the beginning of January next year, the European Commission will begin substantive work on the 20th package of sanctions against Russia. This is reported by Politico, citing comments from European officials on condition of anonymity. The publication states that the main goal of the package will be to eliminate loopholes for circumventing existing restrictions. The new sanctions may affect the supply of rubber to Russia and the use of the shadow fleet. The sanctions are really starting to bite, and we are seeing stress and pressure on the Russian economy. We are now talking about the 20th package. But believe me, as long as this terrible war continues, there will be a 21st, 22nd, and 23rd package as well. This is ongoing work, and it is a very difficult task, but the EU is determined to find a way forward. Some countries have legitimate reservations regarding the legal framework. However, the conviction that these assets must be used for Ukraine's benefit remains. I hope that in the coming weeks we will be able to make progress.
The Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs is confident that the EU must speed up the adoption of new sanctions decisions. At the same time, informal discussions of the 20th package are already underway. One such platform is the Sanctions Summit, which is taking place in Kyiv on November 27th and 28th. Diplomats and officials from 21 countries have arrived in the Ukrainian capital to discuss methods of economic pressure on the Russian Federation. On the Ukrainian side, the negotiation table includes representatives from the Office of the President of Ukraine, the Cabinet of Ministers, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Security Service of Ukraine, and other agencies.
The sanctions that have already been imposed, in my personal opinion, are insufficient. Russia continues to use its shadow fleet to profit from oil, so broader measures should be taken against ship captains, insurers, as well as oil giants, refineries, and traders. The second issue is technologies and components for weapons. The components are coming from Europe and the United States. The third point is financial sanctions. Right now, we are witnessing Russia actively using cryptocurrencies and cyber financial schemes. The flow amounts to billions of dollars every month.
Strengthening sanction pressure remains an important tool for creating conditions in which Russia will be forced to choose peace over war. And as long as Russia continues to reject any peace efforts, sanctions against it should only become tougher. Every Russian missile and every Russian drone that strikes our cities and civilian infrastructure contains components from Western countries.
Alongside sanction pressure, the EU is accelerating the process of using frozen Russian assets. Bloomberg reports on this. In the coming days, the European Commission plans to announce legislative changes that will allow 140 billion euros to be used as a loan to Kyiv in 2026 and 2027, according to the agency's journalists.
Let us not harbor any illusions about the intentions of the Putin regime. They do not understand diplomacy, they only understand force. And I believe that one of the most powerful tools we have is sanctions. And I sincerely hope that we will prove in practice our ability to use the assets of the Russian Central Bank to ensure Ukraine's necessary financial stability, because this will send a very important signal to Ukraine, first of all, to Russia, secondly, and thirdly, to the whole world that we are capable of fulfilling our commitments to Ukraine and, in essence, making Russia pay.
In turn, Kyiv will insist on preventing the removal of certain Russian oligarchs from the sanctions lists. This was stated by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. According to Andriy Sybiha, Ukraine is already seeing such attempts from some non-European countries. Larisa Petruk, Ruslan Belozyorov for Freedom TV channel.